I never considered myself a restless person. My life with Daniel had been steady for years, quiet dinners, routine weekends, predictable mornings. There was comfort in the rhythm, a sense of security that most people sought. Yet, lately, I had begun to feel invisible, a shadow in the corner of our own home. Daniel was kind, attentive in small ways, but there was a distance I couldn't bridge, a silence that pressed against the walls of our apartment. I wanted to tell him how I felt, but every time I tried, the words seemed fragile, inadequate, or perhaps unnecessary. We had settled into habit, and habit had a way of muting the soul. Then Lucas moved in next door. I noticed him the first day he arrived, hauling boxes with a steady, deliberate pace that suggested a quiet confidence. He had a calm presence, the kind that made you feel like someone else's words mattered more than your own. We exchanged polite greetings at first, small smiles, nods in the hallway, but there was something in his gaze that lingered longer than usual, a subtle warmth that felt unfamiliar yet oddly comforting. I couldn't explain why I noticed it so much, or why I found myself anticipating these brief encounters, replaying them in my mind like a small, private movie. Our conversation started by chance, sparked by a shared package delivery or a casual remark about the weather. He spoke with ease, never rushed, and listened with an attentiveness that caught me off guard. Lucas asked questions that weren't intrusive, but somehow cut deeper than the usual small talk. I told him about my work, my favorite books, the rare moments of joy that I seldom shared with anyone. And he responded, not with judgment, but with understanding, as if he recognized the shape of my thoughts before I even finished speaking. There was a thrill in the simplicity of our growing connection. I found myself replaying our conversations long after they ended, noticing the subtle inflection in his voice, the way his eyes would narrow slightly when he smiled. I caught myself thinking about him in quiet moments at home, a thought that made me simultaneously guilty and alive. Daniel never noticed, or perhaps he did, but didn't question it. Either way, the contrast between my life with Daniel and these brief moments with Lucas became more pronounced every day. One was steady, reliable, but flat. The other was unpredictable, enlivening, but undeniably dangerous. One afternoon, as the spring sunlight fell across our shared courtyard, Lucas asked me casually, almost as if it were no more than a passing suggestion, if I wanted to go swimming in the river nearby. I paused, heart quickening, mind racing. Swimming? With him? I could feel the weight of hesitation pressing against my chest. It wasn't just about the act, it was about what it represented, the line between ordinary life and something uncharted. My thoughts flicked to Daniel, to the life I had built with him, and to the guilt that already hummed beneath my skin. Yet, a part of me, the part one rarely acknowledged, wanted to say yes, yes, I said finally, my voice quieter than I expected. Not a declaration, not a triumph, just a simple acknowledgement of a choice I wasn't entirely ready to understand. Lucas smiled, the kind of smile that was calm, knowing, and infinitely patient. He didn't press, didn't tease. He simply nodded, and in that moment, the air around us felt charged with something unnamed. It was as if a door had opened, quietly, subtly, but in a way that demanded to be noticed. That I went home that evening with a strange mixture of anticipation and guilt. The apartment felt smaller than usual, shadows longer, and silence heavier. I couldn't stop thinking about the river, about Lucas, about what it meant to feel seen in a way that Daniel never had. The line between friendship and something more had begun to blur, and I knew, deep down, that stepping into the river with him would change everything, and somehow, despite every caution, I wanted to cross it. The path to the river was narrow, bordered by wildflowers and tall grass that brushed against our legs as we walked. Lucas led the way, unhurried, his movements confident but effortless, as if he belonged in the quiet expanse of the woods that stretched beyond our neighborhood. I followed behind, heart beating faster than I expected, each step a reminder that I was venturing into something unfamiliar, and perhaps forbidden. That we reached the riverbank just as the sun dipped low, spilling golden light across the rippling water. The river was calm, almost hypnotic, reflecting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Lucas paused at the edge, glancing at me with a look that was somewhere between playful curiosity and quiet invitation. "It's perfect today," he said softly. No one else will be here for hours. His voice was low, measured, yet it carried an intimacy that made my chest tighten that I hesitated, aware of the unspoken boundary we were approaching. Swimming shouldn't feel like an act of confession, and yet with Lucas, every choice felt heavy with meaning. I dipped my hand into the water, and the cold shock made me gasp. He laughed, not loudly, but warmly, and extended a hand to steady me. The contact was brief, almost accidental, but it sent an unfamiliar shiver through me that we waded in slowly, the river swallowing our legs with gentle insistence. I noticed how natural he moved, how fluidly he seemed to exist in this space that was both wild and secluded. I, on the other hand, felt every ounce of hesitation, every small surge of guilt. Daniel's face flickered through my mind, not angrily, not accusingly, just silently, like a shadow tethered to my conscience. I swallowed hard and forced my attention back to Lucas, who was floating nearby, watching me with a calm intensity that made it hard to look away. That we began to talk, not about anything particularly profound, but in a way that made ordinary words feel charged. He asked me about my childhood, the dreams I had quietly shelved, the small regrets I carried with me. And I told him, not everything, not the deepest corners of my heart, but enough to feel exposed. There was a strange comfort in his listening, in the way he didn't rush to respond, didn't try to solve anything. Just presence. Just understanding that at one point, we drifted closer, the water lapping gently around our shoulders. I caught myself studying the lines of his face, the way sunlight caught the faintest hint of freckles across his nose. I reminded myself sharply that I was in a relationship, that Daniel's quiet, patient love existed somewhere beyond the riverbank. Yet the pull between us, subtle, emotional, undeniable, was difficult to resist. My mind spun with questions I hadn't dared to ask before. What did it mean to feel so seen by someone outside of your life? To have your thoughts and silences acknowledged so completely? Lucas's gaze met mine, steady and unjudging. Are you happy where you are? He asked, his voice barely more than a whisper, yet it resonated in a way that made my chest ache. The question wasn't accusatory. It wasn't meant to seduce. It simply demanded honesty, a mirror I wasn't sure I wanted to face. I hesitated, the words caught in my throat, and felt the river shift beneath me as if it understood the weight of the moment that I wanted to speak, to confess, but no words came. Instead, I nodded slowly, a gesture that was both affirmation and denial. Lucas didn't push. He simply smiled faintly and let the silence stretch, filling the space between us with something I couldn't quite name. The world beyond the riverbank, the streets, the apartments, the life I had built with Daniel, felt impossibly distant. For the first time in years, I felt the dangerous, exhilarating pull of possibility. As the sun sank lower, painting the river in deeper shades of gold and crimson, we swam back to the shore in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. I knew, with a quiet certainty, that nothing would ever be the same. The river had revealed a line, invisible yet undeniable, that we had both seen and pretended not to notice. And crossing it, even just emotionally, had already begun to change everything. Returning home after the river, the apartment felt smaller than ever. The walls seemed to close in around me, and even the familiar hum of the refrigerator sounded distant. Daniel was on the couch, reading, seemingly absorbed in the quiet monotony of his evening routine. I tried to smile, to appear ordinary, but the memory of the river, of Lucas's quiet presence and the way he had looked at me, refused to fade. It lingered like a shadow, persistent and unsettling. In the following days, our conversations remained polite but strained. Daniel noticed the subtle shift. I could tell by the way his eyes lingered a moment too long when I walked into the room, or the soft questions he asked about my day. "Everything okay?" he would inquire, and I would nod, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. I had never intended to deceive him, not in this way. Yet every time I thought about Lucas, about the ease of speaking and being heard, I felt a thrill I could not name. It was as if a part of me had woken from a long sleep, and there was no way to silence it. Lucas's presence became a constant, quiet pull on my attention. We met whenever we could, walks in the evening, conversations in the hallway, texts exchanged in the early hours of the night. Every interaction was laden with unspoken meaning, the kind of connection that made the world outside disappear. He asked me questions that I hadn't asked myself in years. "Do you feel alive?" he inquired one night, his words casual but weighted. I hesitated, swallowing hard. Alive. It was a word I hadn't applied to my life with Daniel in a long time. Yet admitting it felt like betrayal that I found myself juggling two realities, the one with Daniel, built on comfort and stability, and the one with Lucas, built on attention and awakening. The duality was exhausting but intoxicating. Each time Daniel reached for my hand, I felt a pang of guilt. Each time Lucas smiled or spoke my name, I felt a surge of something that was both exhilarating and terrifying. I began to recognize the delicate line I was walking, a line that demanded constant vigilance, careful words, and measured silence. One evening, as we walked along the dimly lit streets near my building, Lucas stopped and leaned against a railing. His eyes met mine, searching, almost daring me to speak honestly. "You're hiding," he said simply, the words neither accusatory nor harsh. Just observation. I wanted to tell him everything, to confess that I felt torn between loyalty and desire, between the life I had built and the life I longed to explore. Yet I held back, because once spoken, the truth could never be reclaimed. The tension between honesty and secrecy grew unbearable. I realized that the guilt was not from desire itself, but from the silence, from withholding what I had begun to feel. I began noticing the smallest details, the way Daniel hummed while cooking, the way Lucas's hand brushed mine in a fleeting gesture of comfort. Both moments, seemingly insignificant, carried a weight that I couldn't ignore. I was living in two worlds, each complete and incomplete, each fulfilling and hollow in its own way. Lucas, too, seemed aware of the precariousness of our connection. There was a restraint in his gestures, a quiet acknowledgement that we could not allow this to continue indefinitely. One night, he said softly, "I can't be the secret that changes your life without asking anything of you." His words were calm but firm, a boundary that I had been skirting, unknowingly, for weeks. The truth of it struck me hard. Desire alone could not justify the imbalance we were creating. That I returned home that night, more aware than ever of the line I had crossed. Daniel was asleep, the gentle rise and fall of his chest a reminder of the life I had chosen, the life I had obligations to. I lay awake, thinking about the river, thinking about Lucas, thinking about the fragile tension between freedom and responsibility. It was clear that living in two truths at the same time was unsustainable, and yet I could not bring myself to let go entirely. Something had shifted, quietly but irreversibly. By the time morning came, I knew the path ahead demanded choices, painful, necessary, and unavoidable. And I realized that the longer I hesitated, the deeper I risked sinking into a web of emotional consequences from which neither comfort nor clarity could easily rescue me. The apartment felt quieter the next morning, like sound itself was holding its breath. Ethan stood by the counter, pouring coffee that had gone lukewarm. The storm had passed outside, but inside, something still trembled between them. Lucas sat at the table, scrolling through his phone, pretending not to notice Ethan's silence. Neither of them mentioned the night before, the fog, the question, the invitation that hovered unsaid. Yet every movement, every glance, carried the weight of it. "You didn't sleep much," Lucas said finally, voice cautious. "Neither did you," Ethan replied, taking the seat across from him. Lucas smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I kept thinking about what you said, about things being different in another life." Ethan's stomach tightened. He looked down, tracing a thumb along the mug's rim. "That was just talk." "Maybe." Lucas leaned back, watching him carefully. "But it didn't feel like just talk." The air thickened again, slow and charged. Ethan could feel the familiar ache of wanting to say more and the familiar fear that came right after. "You're overthinking it," he said softly, but his voice betrayed him. Lucas exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, maybe I am. Or maybe I'm just finally being honest." He stood, moving toward the window, watching raindrops slide down the glass. "Claire always said I never let people in. That I kept everyone at arm's length, even her." His reflection looked blurred, distant. She was right. But last night. I didn't feel that wall with you. Ethan froze, the words sinking like stones. Lucas, I'm not saying I understand it, Lucas interrupted. He laughed softly, uncertain. When I asked if you ever thought about things being different. I wasn't asking just to ask. Ethan's pulse quickened. You're straight, he whispered. Lucas turned around, his expression unreadable. I thought I was. The words landed like a confession and a question all at once. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Ethan stood, unsure whether to step closer or farther away. You don't know what you're saying, he managed. Lucas crossed the distance between them, slow and deliberate. Then tell me, he said. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me you didn't feel it too. Ethan's voice broke. I can't. They stood inches apart now, no pretense, no laughter to hide behind. The silence was alive, pulsing with every heartbeat. Lucas reached out, his hand brushing against Ethan's arm, just enough to make him tremble. This doesn't make sense, Ethan whispered. I have Daniel. Lucas nodded. I know. His fingers lingered for a second longer before dropping away. And that's why I shouldn't have said anything. But the damage was already done. Ethan's breath came shallow, torn between guilt and relief. You shouldn't have, he said, though every part of him was grateful that he did. Lucas gave a quiet, humorless laugh. You know what's funny? I thought I came here to get over someone. Turns out I just found someone else I can't have. Ethan's chest ached. Lucas, don't, Lucas interrupted softly. Please don't make it harder by being kind. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of the clock filled the silence, steady and unforgiving. Then Lucas took a small step closer. Can I ask you something? Ethan nodded, unable to trust his voice. Did you ever want to tell me back then? Lucas asked. In college? Ethan met his gaze, eyes burning. Every damn day. Lucas smiled sadly. Guess I was too blind to see it. The space between them vanished, slow, inevitable. When their lips met, it wasn't wild or reckless, it was soft, uncertain, the kind of kiss that carried more truth than permission. It lasted only a second before Ethan pulled away, breathing hard. This can't happen, Ethan said, voice shaking. It already did, Lucas replied. Ethan stepped back, running a hand through his hair. The guilt hit like a tide, cold and immediate. I need you to go, he whispered. Lucas's expression faltered, but he nodded. Yeah. I figured. He picked up his bag quietly, pausing at the door. For what it's worth, he said, you're not the only one who's confused. The door closed softly behind him. Ethan stood there, staring at the empty space where Lucas had been. The apartment felt different now, emptier, yet charged with something that refused to fade. He pressed his palms to the counter, exhaling shakily. Outside, the sky was clearing. Light broke through the clouds, too bright for how heavy he felt inside. Daniel would be home tomorrow. The lie would begin then, Ethan whispered to himself, voice barely audible. Sometimes the truest confessions are the ones we can't keep. And somewhere beneath the sound of the dripping faucet, he could still hear Lucas's voice, soft, sincere, unforgettable. You don't have to be.